So we are going to have a conversation today. We're talking about connecting the physical and social environments with all living species. And the panel today consists of Dr. Magdalena Smrdelj, the Chief Veterinarian and my colleague at the Ontario SPCA. I'm not sure if Petar is here yet. Jandric from Zagreb University of Applied Sciences in Croatia. Well, there he is. Hey, hi, Peter. And Camille Labchuk from Animal Justice. She's the Executive Director and a good friend of the Ontario SPCA's. And of course, Dr. Paul Carr, Université-du-Québec en Outaouais, is also here with us today. So Paul, I think as our host, I'll go to you first and hear your thoughts on what we're talking about today. I think Paul might be frozen. I'm not frozen, right? Somebody give me a head nod. Am I okay? I'm okay.
We still got you, Daryl. Yeah, we got you for sure. Paul does look like he might have been frozen there. From if we've lost him from the meeting, maybe we'll.
All right. Well, Camille, you're the most central in my screen. Did you want to, or could you kick us off, please?
Sure. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Daryl, for that. And I'd like to thank Kate as well for inviting me to take part in this, and for Paul and everybody else who's been involved in organizing, especially folks at the Ontario SPCA. So I'm an animal protection lawyer. I work at a nonprofit called Animal Justice, and we work to try to make sure that our laws as a society reflect our values, which currently they don't. And I think that really relates to accepting animals in our social communities. We've got this disconnect because most of us view animals as our companions, as our family members, as our friends. Yet our laws still view animals as mere property, and our government institutions, in most cases, view them as sort of a private responsibility. And what I mean by that is that so often it's organizations like the Ontario SPCA, like humane societies, shelters, all these types of rescue organizations that are the ones that are responsible for trying to protect animals. Government hasn't taken on this responsibility themselves and either funded it or provided the legal support or laws that we expect as a society. So we'll get into that, I'm sure, a little bit more as we go on, but that's sort of where I'm coming from at the outset.
Thank you very much, Camille. And Petar, are you able to weigh in right now?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks a lot. Okay, I'm Petar Jandric from Zagreb University of Applied Sciences in Croatia, and I'm also editor-in-chief of the journal and book series called PostDigital Science and Education. And my interest is in online learning and online spaces and online places and all other configurations between our online and offline lives, which are numerous these days. So I'm trying to develop this post-digital perspective, which speaks about the inseparability between our analog and our digital existence. And now, before the COVID-19 pandemic, the majority of talk in this direction was, as I started my short presentation, so between the online and the offline. But actually these days, we are much more focused to this relationship, which has now become really important, between biology, information, and society. For instance, speaking about COVID-19 and about vaccinations and about social justice, all those things are done by employing various digital tools, from tools for tracking the infected, for analysis, for whatever. And also, if we take a look at the vaccine industry, which is now huge, again, we have this very complex interplay between biology as a science, information science as fundamental to bioengineering, but also to distribution of vaccines. And then, of course, we have this social aspect, which actually speaks about various ethical questions, differences between the global north and the global south, and so on. So my contribution here, I hope, will be situated somewhere at these complex intersections between biology, information, and society.
Thank you so much. Dr. Smrdelj?
Thank you, Daryl. Hello, everybody. And so there are so many ways that we could talk about this and so many vantage points. So I think what I will just do is stick with the areas where I love to have dialogue. So although I'm a veterinarian and chief veterinary officer with the Ontario SPCA, my interests are far more broad than that because of some other trainings and backgrounds that I have in my life. And so a lot of times, and I don't want to sound new age, but a lot of times people speak about body, mind, and spirit and connecting all of those. And we don't want to just be disconnected bodies kind of thing. And so that basically, I mean, if I think about my own training, I started as a veterinarian, which is body, went to psychotherapy, which is mind, and became an ordained minister, which is spirit. And when I connect, and then I come right back around to being invited to take on the position of chief veterinary officer with the Ontario SPCA, which was Kate's doing. So I put all that blame at her feet. So I was able to bring all of that thinking to this work because the platform of the Ontario SPCA allowed me to do a lot of exploration besides just overseeing veterinary medicine and protocols and things like that. So because of that, I've been able to get involved with the Oxford Center for Animal Ethics. I'm a fellow with that organization, and I'm also a specialist with the veterinary preventive medicine. I'm board certified with that organization as well. So it's because of all my curiosity, but it puts me in a place of so much intersection. And so I think, you know, that there is ultimately at the base of all this, I use this phrase somewhere else, but kind of like a spiritual impoverishment where we've just disconnected from our source, which is spirit, from our earth, from so many things, from our connection with animals. And so I think that one of the reasons why things like humane education are so near and dear to my heart, and the work that Amanda McKibben, who's on the screen, and others like her are doing, is helping to reconnect in the schools, helping the children to stay or grow their connection with their world, with their environment, with animals, grow their empathy and their compassion for all three of the areas that we talk about in One Welfare, which is all people, all living beings, so all people, all animals, and the environment, and understanding that most of our actions do impact those different areas. And if I can just give a quick example, I had the privilege of listening to someone speak, Dr. Ian Houston from Cornell University on Monday, and he presented his research on sea star wasting disease. And so there have been huge die-offs of sea stars. And so what? So what happens with the sea stars is because of our rising temperatures, which we suspect with the global warming or the climate change, that we are at the center of all that with human activities. So with the changes in the temperature, that has affected huge growths of algal blooms, which give off a lot of organic material. And the sea stars are kind of like wearing a coating of bacteria, just like we have on our skin. So they have this bacteria that just thrives on this organic matter that's coming down to them. They give off a lot of oxygen, they use up a lot of oxygen in order to metabolize this organic matter. So these sea stars that are really susceptible to low oxygen levels and hypoxia, they don't have enough oxygen, and they have this thickening coat of bacteria on them that is also blocking the oxygen from getting across their surface, which is how they respire. And they've essentially been suffocating. And that could be connected to someone choosing to eat meat and support factory farming. And then we've got temperature changes from all those different activities wherever our activities are changing the climate. So it could be the factory farming, the cars and the gasoline and so forth. And I just thought, wow, how many of us really connect those dots to recognize that an action of ours is creating that kind of devastation. So that's the kind of thinking that I'm engaged in. Thank you, Daryl.
Thanks, Magdalena, very much. Paul, I see you're back. Thank you for coming back. So if you could give us your thoughts, it'd be appreciated.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Sorry about the connection issue. I want to start by saying that I've been thinking about democracy for a long time, but I didn't really think about the living species part for that long of a time. So I think this is a proviso that often when we're working on issues of humanity, social justice, social change, it's not a natural inclination. At least it wasn't so. But for the past several years, of course, I'm very concerned about this. And I think that the connection between how we understand, respect, and live with all species, plants, animals, the environment, speaks to how we will survive. And I think that clock is ticking. We're in front of a capitalist time bomb. And when I say that, I want to emphasize that we're destroying the planet in many ways, and we know this, but I think the militarization angle is probably the least discussed, and yet this is something that we're all complicit with, and I don't want to make anyone feel bad and go home and say, wow, I need to take a bottle of scotch. It's that we are living in societies that produce arms, that sell arms, knowing that they will kill people, and almost all developed societies do this. It's a catastrophe. 2020 was a record year for the selling of arms, $2 trillion. I believe it was, I've got the statistics here. But so in other words, when we sell these arms, we not only kill people, children, women, we kill cultures, we kill Aboriginal peoples, we take away their lands, we kill species, we kill the environment, and that creates these other metaphors. For example, the erosion of soil. It takes away the soil. For example, in Haiti, there are a few trees. And when we have a lot of rain and natural disasters, then we have a very ripe environment for cholera. And so I'm not sure if it was here or in another session, but the pandemic was foreseeable in a sense. We've created the conditions for this type of catastrophe. In relation to the species part, you know, did some research for the keynote and in general, but I just want to throw out a few figures here, which I find are overwhelming, is that the World Wildlife Fund experts believe that the extinction rate now is 1,000 to 10,000 times higher than the natural extinction rate. So dinosaurs and so on. So it's accelerated. 6,300 known species of amphibians are at risk of extinction. 12% of the 10,000 bird species, 20% of the 1,800 fish species, half the world's 5,000 known mammals are in decline. 21% of the total evaluated reptiles are in decline. 70% of plant species. So in other words, we're destroying the planet, and we're doing it at record speed. We're increasing our militarization. And what does this have to do with connecting things? Well, I think that the social inequalities are increasing. Wealth concentration in the hands of few. During the pandemic in Canada and the United States, the wealth has been excessively highly concentrated in the hands of very few people. More and more people are facing tougher times, not just paying rent, having jobs, but really living on the street. So I think that the upside is that these are man-made issues for the most part, and that we are able to do something. And I'll just conclude this small part by saying that we live with a lot of paradoxes. And I mentioned today that we're interested in the environment, we drive cars, of course, yes, we're individuals, we take planes. Those are some of the things, but also we tolerate massive militarization, massive social inequalities as a society. I'm certain at home in families, every family, every community thinks, yes, we're good people and so on. But as a society, these are societal problems. So I think the animal species part is overwhelming. We extract minerals at a record breakneck speed for telephones and other technology, but these are short-term ventures. So we have to, we think what we want to have is a democracy, a functioning democracy. And that means, how do we have dialogue? How do we have decision-making? How do we decide what resources will be used? And I do want to say that there are many people, many groups, many social movements doing lots of very good work. And I don't want to diminish that. I think formal power is not as responsive and is not moving at the same speed, which means that formal power is controlled by perhaps smaller segments of the population. But I hope these comments fit in with some of the others that Magdalena and Peter and so on, Camille have to say. Thank you.
That was excellent, Paul. Originally, I was part of the panel. Unfortunately, the chairperson couldn't be here today, so I'm doing dual roles. My name is Daryl Vaillancourt. I am with the Ontario SPCA. I think the perspective that I can help bring to this table is I've been in the animal well-being sector now for over 10 years. And of course, we, as the domestic companion animal experts, we have a lot to offer. But I also have a background where I've been in municipal politics now for 16 years, and I can really help shed light on a politician's view. I know that my friend Camille and I were in Oxford, and a lot of us on this call, and we had the chance to speak the professor from Michigan. And I remember the room talking about, it got to question period, and they said, well, shouldn't we just be able to change a law? Can it be that easy just to change a law and to make these things happen quickly? And his talk revolved around the complexity of, especially when you get into higher levels of government. So municipal government's the closest to the people. You make a decision on a Monday night, and Tuesday morning it affects change. Provincial governments here in Canada is a little bit higher up. Then, of course, there's federal governments in most of the jurisdictions that we're all a part of. And making law is very, very complex, and changing laws and ways of thinking is really hard. So I guess to get the ball rolling, back to Camille, I don't know if you recall the professor from Michigan State, but why is it that we can't seem to get such simple laws changed to help with some of these challenges we've identified?
Well, thanks for the question, Daryl. And that's an interesting one. And I think I'll answer it by using kind of a case study, an example from here in Canada. So those of you who are Canadian on this call this discussion will know very well that a couple of years ago, just about 2 years ago, Canada banned keeping whales and dolphins in captivity, which was hugely exciting for all of us up here. It was a long time coming. So, Ontario SPCA had done lots of work to protect captive whales and dolphins. Many people had campaigned for years in Vancouver and Ontario, where these animals were located. And, just to put this into context, Canada, before the law passed, had around probably 60, 65 of these animals in captivity. There were a couple in Vancouver at the aquarium there, and the bulk of them were at Marineland, where there were many belugas, a few dolphins, and one orca whale. So we're not talking about an enormous number of animals, but certainly the suffering that they endure while being kept in these tiny concrete tanks was intense. And a senator in Canada watched Blackfish, became really inspired to try to be part of that solution. So he proposed a bill in the fall of 2015 that would have outlawed the captivity of these creatures. And that bill, that was the very start of one of Canada's parliamentary sessions. So it was introduced right after an election. And that bill went through the parliamentary process for 3.5 years before it finally passed. And it was a really, really tough slog. You might think, well, this only affects a couple, dozen animals. Really, it shouldn't be that complex. It's an issue where Canadians already agree that we shouldn't have these animals in captivity. So you'd think it would be, a relatively simple matter to pass it. And, most parliamentarians were in support of it, but a couple of things happened. So first of all, a couple of senators managed to gum up the process and delay it for literally years. They almost killed it behind closed doors a couple of times. And it was only saved because Canadians rose up and emailed senators and politicians so many emails, in fact, that it crashed the Senate's email server and really showed them that people cared about this issue. So that was pretty cool to see. And then I won't get into all of the details because there are so many of them, but just step after step, there were efforts to block this by the aquarium industry, by Marineland, by Vancouver Aquarium, and also by other animal use industries. And I think here's where we get into the problem. So industries that, like farming or like labs or hunting and fishing, were not going to be affected in any way, shape, or form by a bill banning whales in tanks. But these industries view any form of animal protection as the thin edge of the wedge. And as a first step that might eventually come and support regulation of their industries too, to better protect the animals that are used in places like farming and hunting and fishing. So that kind of industry pressure was not really overt, it was behind the scenes, but it was very influential to politicians who wanted to try to stop this bill and block it to keep their friends in those industries very happy. So I think to answer your question, Daryl, that's one of the problems that we have as a society trying to protect animals better in this way, is that some industries view any sort of progress whatsoever, even if it's something that everybody agrees on, as an attempt at, complete animal liberation one day, which, some of us may want, but a bill to ban whale and dolphin captivity certainly would not have accomplished that.
Absolutely, Camille. Yeah, the other piece that in Canada, I know it's Canada-centric, Camille and I are talking about, but in the laws in Canada, animals are considered property, which is a real challenge. So there is work and a lot of people talking about making sure they're seen as sentient beings. So if Magdalena, if I could go back to you about the work that I know you're working alongside Amanda McGibbon, who happens to be on this call as well, or in this roundtable, and how we're working on a paper, and we're trying to get a focus of people to see animals as sentient beings instead of property.
There we go. Hello. Yes, animals as sentient beings. There is so much research involved with this, and I remember it was quite a few years back that I heard Jane Goodall speak about her earlier experiences, and so I've forgotten the timeline. It might have been in the 60s, but whenever she was actually doing her original research to begin with, in order to get her, I guess it was a bachelor's or a master's in science, but back then when she was doing that work, she said something along the lines of having gone to a university. This was when she came back from being out in the field, and she had gone to, I guess, where she was doing her work, and had spoken to some researchers, and they basically said that they did get it. They knew that these animals, specifically primates, were present. They were sentient, they had consciousness, they had thinking, they were learning, they were doing things that we know about, like I don't know if the sign language and things like that were happening back then, but there was an understanding that there was something there, a sentience, but because there wasn't any written articles and it wasn't the way people were normally thinking, and animals were, we were still in the thick of things with exploiting animals, even more so if that's possible than we're doing now. People just didn't want to say that out loud or admit it or say it in a paper. They just wanted to hide that. And so that's what Jane Goodall said, was that already back then, people were already, and I'm sure that it's been eons, that there's always been some people that get it, that are more connected or that are willing to admit that animals have sentience or are living beings that aren't just automatons. And I mean, I don't want to go too far afield, and it's certainly not my area of expertise, but certainly we dehumanized folks that we enslaved, or that we have appropriated their lands. So I'm speaking of Black populations, Indigenous populations, all sorts of peoples that have been disenfranchised because they've been thought of as something less than us, whoever the us is, something less than human. And so it's not a big surprise that we would do that with animals as well. And so I think that that is a piece that is a challenge for us, because as long as we want to be farming animals and eating animals and that kind of thing, it becomes a real source of tension around trying to give them, a sentience category, and then find protocols and ways of producing, et cetera, that can actually honor that they are sentient beings. Like, that is such a conflict. How do you do that? And so anyway, what we're doing with our paper is we're just kind of going through the different areas, and really Amanda should be speaking about this, and maybe she'll say more when we kind of open the floor a little bit. But we're basically going through all the different populations of animals and our practices around them, whether it's zoo animals, animals in shelters, animals in the wildlife, animals in the classroom, or in research institutions, right? Animals are in so many different places. And so what are our morals and ethics around how we live with them, use them, exploit them? And also we've been kind of looking at, even this thing that eclipsed everything over the last year and a half, the pandemic, which has been so focused on human beings. But the fact is that animals all throughout the world have also been affected. Research labs had to shut down during lockdowns, and so animals had to be euthanized because no one was going to be there to look after them or do research on them or whatever. So there were researchers that took aquariums home with them to keep at the home so that they wouldn't have to kill those animals. And many, I know many pigs were euthanized because they just couldn't get them to the packing houses, to the slaughterhouses, because there were big outbreaks and lockdowns and so on and so forth. And so sort of trying to pull all my thoughts together because this is sort of on the fly. And so wildlife, certainly we've had, we had mink affected, and so on farms, and huge depopulations of minks on farms, but out of that, the feral cats on the farms were getting it as well. And so many animals were used and then sacrificed in research to understand better how this virus works and does it affect dogs, cats, ferrets, etc. So all these different areas in companion animals, and not so much with us or up here in Canada, but we did hear of people surrendering animals because they were afraid that they might get coronavirus from their dog or something like that. Not in huge numbers, but again, that fear, right? And the big cats in the zoos, there's been a number of zoos that have had cats get the COVID-19 allegedly from their asymptomatic zookeepers. So that's something that we're doing a treatment on as well, is how far reaching this COVID-19, because no one's really focusing on the world at large and the animals and the source, which is most likely bats, but nobody's actually making that 100% statement. I can say like 99.99% it came from bats, and then probably went to the farmed wildlife, and then eventually to the wet markets and everywhere else. But I know I've shared with a few people that they did, some researchers did some serology on a number of like farmers and people in those areas that farm wildlife and so forth, and they're working off the land and raising animals and so forth. And many of them had coronavirus antibodies, not to COVID-19. This was previous to that, but different coronaviruses. So we know the coronaviruses are there, the bats are reservoirs, and they are jumping over. And they've jumped over a lot already. This one just happened to become extremely virulent and affect the whole world. But I think that this is happening all the time. And we know this, and we know the possibilities of this. And so just like Paul mentioned earlier, we knew this could happen. We've known about, if we just talk about coronaviruses, never mind avian influenza and everything else, with coronaviruses, we've known since I think 2006 that there are many coronaviruses in bats that could potentially spill over. And so I think that, that this is really important to think about. So anyway, that's what our paper is going to be looking at, or is looking at.
Thanks, Magdalena. Paul, or do you have any thoughts to add to the sentient being piece?
I do have something I wanted to comment on, and you know, through Kate and the OSPCA, and just through reading and hearing things, I'm very much astounded, and I shouldn't be. I'm a sensitive guy, of course, but there's so much cruelty towards animals, and it's hard to really consume that that the animals provide so much love and joy for so many people. They're so meaningful. So there's that piece that there still is that aspect, cruelty towards animals. But I'm wondering if you might, I'll throw a question out to the colleagues, Magdalena, Camille, Peter, others. What are some of the initiatives that you see, some of the maybe radical, inspirational, transformative initiatives that you see that might provide more sustenance and support and relevance for society? Animals represent so much for so many people. I'm thinking there's many people who feel disaffected, and animals provide a link. There's other people that's just a part of their family, the way they're raised. Are there initiatives that you think of, that you can think of, that changing laws, parks, housing, against discrimination? Are there initiatives where I'm thinking, why not provide a subsidy to people who want animals? I don't know how much money, but to help them support, because these are things that make them feel better. There's a human, socio-cultural, spiritual, socio-emotional, environmental value. So I'm interested. I have a few things I'd like to say about education, but I think that I'm just wondering, do you see that there's spots of light out there to help us move forward? I haven't heard of governments and other people saying, look, we want to provide subsidies to people have animals because this makes them feel more peaceful. We know there's studies in prison and so on. And what are your thoughts?
Paul, I can share a few words to start, if everyone's all right with that. I was just thinking about access to veterinary care. And so there is a group, there's, I wish I had his bio in front of me because it's so impressive, but he's a veterinarian who's with the University of Tennessee with the Department of Veterinary Social Work. And he was, I believe, Surgeon General for a number of years, but he's very highly qualified to be speaking to these matters. And so he has started something, I guess we could call it a movement, but there's just some pilot projects happening down in some communities in the United States. And so I need to sort of stay on top of that to see what kind of ideas they come up with. But he was even thinking of things as, you know, things that we wouldn't even think about in terms of even changing, you know, some tax regulations or ways that people are taxed so that you could include animals. His premise is, or thesis or whatever, is animals in the home are a family member. And so we need to support the family. And so that even tax laws could include that, where you would have them as dependents or something where you could actually, right, claim them and decrease your taxation level and things like that. And point of sale donations within communities. So things that could be done at a higher level, federal level, but also things done within communities where money could be raised in order for this sort of thing. Like, I think one of the areas definitely is access to veterinary care so that people can get their animals, get even just basic care. And then they are looking at other matters. They're connected with social work. It is the School of Social Work. So they are also looking at housing and other things. So I think that that's a group that we're definitely keeping an eye on to see what kind of great initiatives and great success they have. And of course, we're doing our own work here in Canada as well, and partnering with Northern and Indigenous communities to support them with their dog populations. But also there's HABRI, Human Animal Bond Research Institute, that's it. And so HABRI has done all kinds of research around the human animal bond. And so making connections with animals and their effect on kids on the spectrum and how they cope, and people that have had heart disease, heart attacks, like all sorts of research that they've done around animal-assisted therapy, as well as just having animals in our lives. And so knowing about that research and sharing that research, I think is really important, because that also helps justify why would we keep animals in the homes of people who can't afford it, right? Like if you can't afford it, you shouldn't have one. It's such backward thinking that is not supportive at all to the human animal bond or to the human being's health and well-being. And excuse me, getting another sip of scotch. The last thought that I had, which I can't think of right, yeah, oh, humane education, of course. So I think humane education has massive promise, because that's something that we can actually, introduce into institutions and into formal learning as well as informal learning. So I'm sure that there are many other ways to do all this, but those are sort of the three main areas that that came to mind as you were asking the question. Thanks, Paul.
And I can weigh in as a follow-up to that. Those were really interesting, sort of great specific examples, Magdalena. And something came to mind to me more recently that's a bit more of a macro level, but I think kind of sets the stage for more of those specific policies to come into place. And we spoke earlier about how animals are property. They're considered property all over the world right now, but some countries are nonetheless recognizing explicitly that they're also sentient beings. Now, I think that's probably implicit in most laws too, because you would not have animal cruelty laws unless you recognize that they could feel pain. But nonetheless, it's cool to see that some countries are taking that step. The UK is one such country, and they, of course, now that they've left the EU, they have the ability to do some things that they couldn't do before because of the trade bloc restraints. So they're recognizing that animals are sentient beings, but they're going one step further and creating a commission or a body, sort of an oversight committee that will sort of operationalize that concern over animals being sentient beings. So instead of just making it a symbolic gesture, they're actually saying this committee is going to oversee and look at and examine government policies and see how those policies would affect these sentient beings. So for an example, Canada at least, and a lot of other countries too, subsidize heavily the meat industry, the dairy industry, the egg industry. Not only are these industries responsible for human-caused climate change, which is affecting all of us, including animals, domestic and wild animals, but these industries also, of course, have a very serious effect on the well-being of these sentient animals. So I think it's a really innovative and cool thing that government is looking at doing to try to make this declaration of sentience a little bit more concrete and actually sort of incorporate it into government policies and government spending.
Peter?
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking, I mean, this is quite remote from my own research, and also it's quite Canada-centered as well. But I think that when we speak about animal rights or recognizing animals as property or not as property, as something else, I mean, from post-humanist philosophy and post-humanist thought, we know that this decision is definitely a normative and not a descriptive category. And it's really about which beings we decide to include where and in which way. Now, the thing is that we now live in the age of the Anthropocene, and that animals, for instance, such as pets like cats, dogs, and so on, or even feral cats, which live in large cities such as Zagreb or Toronto or whatever, are actually there and have certain lifestyles because human beings enabled them to lead such lifestyles. And now I've been looking at some studies which show that actually invasive predators, mammalian predators, such as, for instance, cats and dogs, are actually giving some of the key contributions to global biodiversity loss. So, for instance, according to a recent study, feral cats are responsible for 26% of all species extinctions in the past few centuries, because feral cats actually kill rodents. I mean, they hunt. It's there. I have a cat. She's around here, and actually they are hunters. And dogs are responsible for certain amount of extinctions, and so on and so on and so on. So, looking at cats and dogs and all these animals, I think that we need to be aware that we are situating that there's not really a place in this earth where these animals will be in their original or non-disturbed environment. They always are in human-made environments, whether they are domestic animals, whether they are feral animals, and so on, and they do have environmental impacts. So now, thinking of which, when we speak about rights of various beings as normative categories, then we kind of, I think, really need to take this very, very broad anthropogenic view, in which we actually take a look at the whole planet, and we take a look at all various interactions between various species on various levels. So protecting one species, which will then make 26% of other species extinct, is maybe not the best idea. Or maybe it is, but to protect this species under certain conditions. So what I'm saying is that again, looking at the combination of some of the recent breakthroughs in biology and ecosciences, plus a bit of this post-humanist and post-anthropogenic philosophy, that I think that we should consider these questions in a much more holistic way than these questions are normally being considered. So when we speak about well-being of certain species of animals, it's not just about well-being of them. It's about well-being of all other species which are connected to these species in a way that we can somehow produce some kind of equilibrium or balance where we can actually create our normative standards and principles, which should ideally then pour into political, into actions and eventually legislations, which will actually be designed in the way to protect a wide variety of different organisms. And now we also, for instance, as of quite recently, actually, we have also just came to understand things such as the importance of, for instance, microbiology. So 20 years ago, nobody really spoke too much about probiotics, for instance. Today, we know that the bacteria are really, really important parts of all animal existence on this planet, including human existence. Now, the question is, how do we involve this micro level as well? I mean, of course, when we take a look at the whale or the dolphin, it's a beautiful, huge animal at the top of food chain, and terrible things happen when you remove the top of food chains, because then this has reflections on all other levels, smaller animals, up to the very smallest ones. But we do tend to focus to pets, to animals which are, big, which are visible, which are around us. And the idea that my cat is able to kill 30 or 40 different species when she goes out every night is not so visible because it's a cuddly nice cat, and those kind of smaller things that she kills. Even now, I said things, and it was a real type, not typo, but it was a real. I mean, I just said it because, yeah. So that's the idea. We don't really. We tend to look at those at things which are similar to us, at animals which are similar to us, at species which are similar to us in size, in impact, in their ability to cuddle, in their ability to provide various types of support and other services and so on. But I think that we should actually broaden our understanding of this to whole ecosystems, from very big animals such as belugas to very small ones such as bacteria.
Thanks, Peter. I look forward to Camille lobbying for plankton laws to be changed, Camille. I'll give you a call. That was really thought-provoking, Peter. We're down to, we only have 13 minutes left. These are shorter sessions. So what I thought we could do, I thought we could just go around the table, possibly offer up, because Paul set the stage. It's like, is there hope? There's a lot of challenges out there, but is there hope? And then hopefully we'll be able to reserve a few minutes for questions. So just to kick it off, I can tell this group that in North America, the largest sector of companion pet owners are the millennials. They very much think differently about not only their companion animals, but the environment and the animals, every other animal. So much so that in North America, it is a fact now that when they're buying a home, how it supports their animal, their companion animal at home, is one of their top 3 reasons for actually buying a home. So if it not only fits the human people in the home, but if it doesn't fit their pet dog Fido, they will actually move on to another home. So that's how focused they are on animals and their futures. So Camille, did you have any kind of happy or some glimmer of hope thoughts before we go to questions?
Oh yeah, I guess I would add to that, not only are millennials and especially Generation Z, we're interested in having companion animals and especially rescued companion animals, which is great. They're also big time meat reducers. They're eating fewer animal products. They're interested in finding alternatives to animal protein. I think that gives me a lot of hope because the largest category of animals that we use and abuse for human purposes are those animals raised for food. I don't know the stats around the world, but in Canada, we killed 834 million animals for food in 2019. And when you look at animals used for labs, used for fur, used for all other purposes, that combined number is probably somewhere in the region of 10 to 15 million animals. So it's an overwhelming number. And I think that's one of the areas where we need to see the most difference, not just for animals, but for the sake of our planet, because we know that we can't meet those climate targets without reducing meat consumption too. So it's one of those examples where our use of animals is connecting to our health, connecting to the health of the planet in many, many different facets. And, connecting to the pandemic as well, as Magdalena has spoken about. There were 2 cases of pig or swine flu that emerged in Manitoba, a Canadian province, just a few weeks ago. That could be quite troubling. And these diseases arise from wild animals. They also arise from factory farms. So we need to tackle this issue. And to me, I think the attitudes that we're seeing in the younger generations right now are one of the most inspiring and hopeful things.
Absolutely. Thanks, Camille. Peter?
Well, I'll just give you a short example. I live in Croatia, which is a Balkan country, and we have loads of feral cats around. So when I wanted to have a pet cat, I simply went out and picked up the first one in the street, and I brought it home, and I said, no, this is my cat. Now, my brother lives in Edinburgh, and when he wanted the pet cat, because there are no feral cats in Edinburgh, he had to go to the actual shop and pay 200 pounds, to actually obtain the cat. And then it's not just about obtaining the cat, but he had to have a space for the cat. He had to meet certain conditions in order to even be able to pay for the cat. Now, I do believe that we need to control population of feral animals. I do believe that it's wonderful to have so many pets, and I do believe that we need to regulate this in a way because these animals need to be protected. But I deeply disagree with the idea to make this just one more capitalist industry designed for money making. So for me, the idea, hope would be in community models, community ways of raising and sharing and caring about the animals, which will somehow reach beyond this marketplace and which will somehow be more than just one more industry. Yeah, just one more industry.
Thanks, Peter. Magdalena?
Yes. I don't sort of have a final sweeping in conclusion kind of comment, so I'm not sure. I guess the main thing I'm thinking about is, I mean, there's always things that we're working on. So we're hoping that, you know, with, for instance, if I mentioned humane education. So if I go back to that, there's the hope that we actually are influencing the leaders of tomorrow so that we have more insightful and enlightened leaders, besides some of the ones that we have these days that are not as sensitized to some of these concerns and are not putting things like climate change or animal welfare and other concerns that we've talked about here today, infectious disease, surveillance, that kind of thing, at the forefront. And so I think that it's just really important that people of like mind that are thinking about these things, that we just continue to have conversations and support one another in our work, share our work, and stay in the conversation, because I think, again, from the spiritual sense of it, we really are all one at the source. We're one spirit. And so in this illusion of fragmented beings, the more of us that come together and coalesce in the same sort of thinking, and then kind of spread that around, my hope is that that has some effect as our organizations continue to work together and strive for change.
Thanks, Magdalena. And Paul, can you take it home for us?
My thoughts are the following: that human needs are in conflict with human consumption. And I think Peter really laid it out very nicely. And that what we need is more solidarity, social solidarity, and less destruction of the planet. And how do we get there? There's no easy way, but I don't think governments and decision makers will move without massive social mobilization, social movements, and really bona fide, intense dialogue. And so we have to create more spaces. I think education, we didn't touch on it that much, but education is key. But these social movements that we're seeing, Me Too, men have been dominating women forever, but there's been a cataclysmic shift in the landscape in the last couple of years. Black Lives Matter, Idle No More, Occupy Wall Street, all sorts of movements. Now they seem disparate, but I think they're connected in many ways, maybe not explicitly. And so I think we have to support social movements, NGOs, other groups doing excellent work, and at the same time work to change laws and governments. But we don't have enough time to wait for governments to fully jump on board. But I really appreciate all the comments, and I liked Peter's comments. And I was in Peru not too long ago, a couple of years ago, and there's a lot of dogs running around in the streets, and it's a problem, so on, all over the place. But I think that humans are causing a lot of problems. I'm thinking of these icebergs that are melting. I'm thinking of deforestation. I'm thinking of all sorts of other emission problems that I think humans as a group can mobilize. I'm hoping. If not, we're really we're finished. In French, the carottes sont cuites. It's over. So there are a lot of people doing a lot of good work, but I think we have to work at so many levels: formal, informal, non-formal. But personally, I've enjoyed the dialogue because I don't think we have enough of it. And this conference, the three themes: democracy, global citizenship, transformative education, didn't initially kind of say, well, let's focus on this issue, and this is an important issue. So thanks to everyone. And I think we have to really bring this issue more into the mainstream of transformative education and other debates on the environment.
Thanks, Paul. We have about 4 minutes left. If there's anybody that has a question or would like to make a comment, we have a few minutes to do that. I know Jeff Scher made a really great comment in the chat. If you haven't seen it yet, thanks for doing that, Jeff. And I think Io is still with us. Can you moderate the question period now?
Yeah, so somebody did ask a question about ways to empower young people to use their voices in speaking up for political and legal change for animals and living beings. And also maybe give some ideas how we can support humane education sort of in a more institutional format.
Because I'm chaired today and I have a little bit of latitude that I can give myself, I'm going to, my colleague Amanda McGibbon is with us. I'm going to put you on the spot, Amanda. You are our animal smart humane education guru. And if you could give us your thoughts on this, it'd be appreciated. When she's getting ready, we'll keep talking. So,
thanks, Daryl.
Ready with the Ontario SPCA, Amanda McGibbon leads our Animal Smart Humane Education program, which I'm very proud to say, and I'm not shy to say it, that if there were a silver bullet for humane education, we have it, and we'd be happy to share it with anyone. It is completely free. And Amanda, do you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just keep it really brief. Children in general have an affinity, a natural affinity for animals, and children being able to connect with animals doesn't just benefit animals, it also benefits them. It helps them to maybe grow certain understandings of the world beyond what they might be sort of exposed to on from day to day. And it helps them. It's like this, rather than having to sort of get on board around something that they're being encouraged to think about, because they already have this connection with animals. It's almost like you have their buy-in already, and it's a really beautiful way of sort of bringing them into the conversation, to getting them to start to think about the things that they'd like to see change or like to see get better. And in our presentation earlier, so I won't go into too much about humane education, but humane education isn't just about animals, it's about everything. And it really talks about what Magdalena's talked about with one welfare, and Peter, you talked about this holistic approach to understanding how we can make the world well again, people, animals, and the environment. If we need to focus on all of it, and through animals, through this natural affinity, we're able to engage children right away into that conversation and sort of scaffold and build on that engagement and inspired thinking. Because children are children, as Camille has alluded to, children are our way to a different world. We got here with the thinking that we have. Children will bring their thinking and their sort of the creativity and their willingness to think beyond what's always been done, and that's what we need. So I could go on, but I won't.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Amanda. That brings us to the end of this session. I'd like to thank Magdalena, Peter, Camille, and Paul for all their contributions today in the comments. I know Laurence put a great comment in the chat. Thank you very much, Laurence.